due diligence for somebody working with self-employed individual in Holland, something that we would have asked for as well. It's something that proves somebody is registered as a freelancer locally and helps us to understand that they're a genuine compliant structure. The difference being now that this is a free document that's applied for from the Chamber of Commerce in Holland. It's given on an annual basis. It's going to be replaced, and it's going to be replaced from May 16, even though there will be a transition period of a 12-month period through until the following May. The VAR's purpose, to a certain extent until now, has been that if in any case there was a reclassification of an external employee, an external contractor, for example, on the client site, the VAR indemnified the end user. So essentially, were they to be reclassified, the employer's charges, which would be circa 18–19% in Holland, backdated retrospectively back to day one, which wouldn't have been paid, of course, in a self-employed contingent worker situation, would then be due. Under the new agreement, rather than the VAR making the contingent worker directly responsible at 100%, therefore indemnifying the end client, the new agreements now mean that it's an equal share. So both the end client and your contractor essentially face an equal responsibility for that value. And the reality is, of course, that we may well see a trend with clients in the Dutch market wanting to move away from potential risk of working with contractors towards a more safe, secure route of operating with somebody who, if they are already an employee, for example, of CXC Global BV, they can't then be reclassified as a deemed employee of theirs. So we may well see a change on that basis. This is obviously something that's going through currently. This is an active situation. Moving on to Germany. Germany, as with Holland, same thing, multi-model approach, i.e. we can work on the basis of payroll and also self-employed registration. In fact, it's quite a good place to be self-employed. There are certain dispensations for freelancers which make it very attractive. We're going to, again, today, though, we'll be focusing, in fact, the opposite on the employed side of things. Now, German labour law determines something called labour leasing. So if you are employing somebody and then leasing them out for the services to somebody else, under German law, you require something called an AUG license. It's relatively expensive to get. It requires having a local presence. And in fact, it changes the entire contractual chain because under German labour law, the contractual chain must involve the license holder, the AUG license holder, contracting directly with the end user. There is no facility for the common sort of MSP type model that we see in the UK and the US as well, whereby there might be somebody within the chain that obviously sort of break up the chain. In this situation, that can no longer be the case. And in fact is essentially an illegal operation were that to be the case. One of the other significant changes that's been made at the moment, again with regards to the deemed employment side of things, up until now, if you were a German client and you were audited and you had a contractor on site who was then reclassified and you could see that there was a risk potentially that they don't adhere to the rules of being recognized as a contractor, as an external consultant, you could then opt for that consultant to be passed through to an AUG partner. So, for example, they could be passed, an end client in Germany with a contractor directly who is worried about an audit, could pass that contractor to CXC Global, and through our AUG license, we would employ and lease their services back to that client, therefore, again, indemnifying them and removing that potential risk. What we've actually seen now is that route, which was essentially known as the second defence, has again now been outlawed, or potentially is going to be. It means, of course, that in an audit situation now, if the German Finanzamt do decide that you have somebody on site who is not an external contractor because they don't meet the needs, then they become your employee immediately. You don't have the option to say, okay, fine, we're going to move them to an AUG partner to make sure that everybody's happy. You end up in a situation then with a retrospective requirement. What we have noticed as well, and what we've seen as a case study, is that there is currently a large German staffing organization who have actually just disengaged 180 contractors in Germany. They've done this to avoid potential future risks, and this was information passed down from their board on the basis that the business managers of each of those entities have a personal liability with regards to any deemed employment costs. And obviously that's a significant issue when you're talking about 20% employers' costs backdated on a contract. The other change that we've seen is a broadening of the scope and the definition for what is recognised as an employee. Indirectly, that means, of course, there's a definition change for who is a self-employed individual. And finally, with regards again to the AUG licensing, we're now under the basis that historically an AUG employee through an AUG license could work for essentially an unlimited period of time. That is now being reviewed potentially to 18 months as a maximum on a client site. Again, on the client site is important. You can't move to another AUG partner and stay on the same client site for another 18 months. Once you've been there for 18 months, you would be reclassified as an employee. And then, of course, it's not just the financial impact, but also the fact that they then have workers' rights. It's more difficult to terminate the contracts. So obviously, if new legislation is passed, then this, again, will be active from January 2017 for the German market. Finally, just to talk about a little bit about France. France, again, in certain similarities with Holland and Germany, allows for the multiple model approach. We're going to be talking today more about the payroll model, the employment model, referred to as portage in France. One of the changes we've seen recently is that from a French perspective, portage wasn't really a recognized solution sort of a number of years ago. It is now much more so. François Hollande in the last couple of weeks has actually come out and personally said that he sees this as a genuine model that will help the unemployment situation in France because it's a stepping stone for contractors. The French in particular tend to be very, very nervous of moving into a self-employed model away from a salaried model. One of the main reasons for that is because they have an extremely strong social security and unemployment coverage in France. It's paid for by the fact that the employer's costs in France are among the highest in Europe. They get up to 42% for the employer on top of obviously what gross pilot the salary you're paying. But the trade-off for that, of course, is that the employees themselves, once they've been working for a set period of time, I believe at the moment it's around 6 months of contributions on a continuous basis, they have access then to 70% of their previous earnings for a period of up to 18 months at the end of their contract. So obviously it can be difficult to convince somebody to move away from an employed situation where they have the job security and, of course, the backup of knowing that they would have X amount of salary at the end of that contract compared to being a contractor where they would be potentially left with none of that coverage afterwards. So genuinely we see rates having to be 2-3 times what they would expect to see as a salaried individual to convince people to move away and move towards a more contract-based work. So that's for me. I think I'm passing back over now to John.
Yes, we're actually going to, in the best interest of time, John and Michelle, we're going to skip the poll question. So Michelle, if you can go into Europe, the risk of non-compliance, please.
Sure. So we thought we'd simplify things. We've obviously touched on some countries, and we thought we'd go through the risk of non-compliance across Europe. So because of the complexity of doing business in Europe, and the high social security rates and taxes and cost of employment, there are still companies that would offer grey solutions. And what we mean by grey solutions is tax avoidance and tax efficiency solutions that look to maximise the contractor's take-home pay without fully complying to local law. These kind of solutions have been around for a long while. Lots of companies still utilise them. But what we're seeing across Europe is the local authorities becoming more aware of the use of these solutions and cracking down on them. So we see spot check audits on end users across Europe. If contractors are caught using a solution that is in a grey area, that is tax avoidance, then we face the same issues. So there's chain law, there's debt transfer, and there's backdated liabilities not only for the contractor but also for the end users. It can have a much more detrimental impact for everybody because not only is it fines, interest and penalties, if you're a foreigner working in that country, if you're an expat, then the likelihood is you're going to be deported. Worst case scenario, the governments or the authorities in those countries can decide to freeze your assets. And for an end user, if you're caught engaging workers that are not using the correct immigration, so they don't have a work permit or they haven't been paying the correct taxes, then it could lead to an employment ban for contract workers. So we've seen it with a large telco company in Europe. they were engaging contractors non-compliantly and bringing them into work on business visas, and they were stopped from engaging contract workers for a period of time, and then they were monitored very closely by the authorities to ensure that when they were engaging contract workers, it was done properly. So we're seeing more case law and recent examples of the authorities clamping down across Europe. The focus for us since the economic crisis in Europe is to recoup unpaid taxes, close tax loopholes, and recover debt by recovering as much tax as possible and ensuring that everybody is a taxpayer. So if we can move to the next slide. I've told you the risk of non-compliance, but now I guess we should touch on how we get it right. So our advice would be to get independent advice. So engage somebody locally in the country where you want to do business or where you'd like to establish a company. Understand that market and research that market based on the sector you're working in and the work you intend to do before you decide to go in and start doing business. We witness a lot of companies that will go into countries and set up and start trading. They don't understand the licensing laws, they don't understand the tax and social security laws, and it ends up with them getting burnt and they have a bad experience. We truly believe if you do get the right advice and you do your research and you do understand your market, then Europe is a very, very buoyant market and can be very, very successful for businesses wanting to engage contract workers. So we would also suggest that you engage a local partner, a local trusted partner, who, if you don't want to incorporate locally, can provide almost like a shell company or a facility to engage contract workers for you. They provide solutions for companies such as CXC. But we would advise you to do your due diligence. There's lots of CXCs out there across Europe, but do your due diligence and make sure you select a good partner. And once you've agreed on the service that they're going to be providing for you, ask for evidence. So if somebody's saying that the contractors are going to be registered and they're going to be paying taxes and social security locally, then you need to see that. You need to have records. You need to be able to provide evidence to your clients that your contractors are compliant in country and paying tax and social security. Finally, we would advise that you work closely with all the stakeholders in the contractual chain. So we would say that you need to communicate to everybody. So once you've selected your partner, work closely to understand the service they're providing. Ensure that this is communicated clearly to your end user so they know how their contractors are going to be engaged. And then also check your contract workers understand the importance of maintaining compliance. And we think that that means you can safely do business across Europe.
Thank you, Michelle and John. This is John Smith again from the United States. Obviously, with all the information that you've brought to the webinar today, we wanted to bring a little bit of the news publications that have been out there lately that are out there on the internet or out in print talking about some of the challenges that companies are having classifying their employees, and also some of the rulings that have come down by some of the European Union governments in contractor classifications. This is just a snippet of some of the recent news that has come out on these issues. Obviously, Uber is front and center with many companies, and many companies are looking at Uber and where that takes them, how they're going to go about classifying their independent contractor drivers throughout the world. Ryanair, another big one that obviously is a big issue in Europe regarding the classification of pilots. So we will send these slides to you if you want to peruse at a later time. Please feel free, and anytime you want information on the European market, CXC Global is absolutely happy to help you out. What are the next steps? The next steps, when you're looking at engaging contractors in the European Union or anywhere around the world, is to really understand the impact of globalization. What does it mean? What does it really mean for your organization to bring contractors into a compliant state throughout the world? Does your company have a firm understanding of what those compliance standards are? Are the regions of your world in full commitment to organize it together and have a plan in action to roll out either a regional or a global plan. Then you have to take a look at balancing your talent. How do you balance your talent demands with your compliance strategy? Obviously, the drive and the search for talent is one that's always there and always present. But how do you manage that with the compliance strategies? And as Michelle had mentioned, getting and understanding a marketplace, using a trusted partner, utilize them as your eyes, ears, and your source on the ground, clearly is one of the best avenues to ensure that not only you and also your contractors are in full compliance. Michelle also had mentioned documentation. We already have one question that has come in from the audience so far about files. How do we protect files? How do we hold files? How do we call them defense files here in the United States? And I'll talk a little bit about that earlier when we get to the question. So it was great timing with Michelle talking about it and one of the questions coming in from the audience. And next, look for additional support, look for experts, look for solutions. There are, as Michelle and John had mentioned, there are various solutions in all the countries. No two countries are alike. No two solutions are alike. What we see a lot here in the United States, is I've been doing this now for about 10 years, is we see a lot of our clients and a lot of our prospects and a lot of contractors that come to us to engage them, to engage talent abroad. They try to fit the American model into the contractor model and the employment models throughout the world. And that's very difficult. It's you can't take a W-2 and say a W-2 here in the United States is the same as an employee anywhere around the world. There are changes, there are complications, there are challenges. So, understand them yourselves or trust an expert like a company like CXC Global. The other thing is look for additional support. There are many avenues of support out there on the internet. There is more and more websites coming up about global compliance that are being put up there by attorneys, by compliance companies, really to give an understanding as the globalization of the workplace is spreading throughout the world and companies are engaging contract labor, gig type, self-employed, freelance labor more rapidly now. There are many experts out there that can help, not just companies like CXC Global, but attorneys, etc. The next thing we want to talk about is one of the challenges we have here in the United States when we're working with clients like yourselves and we're talking to our partners is how do we pay these contractors and how do we get invoiced? One of the interesting things that CXC Global has learned over the years is to take a look at what compliance really means. We have clients that generally ask us to pay contractors in US dollars throughout the world, and while that's generally okay, I won't say allowed, okay, depending on what the contractors want, especially now with the US dollar being very strong. A lot of contractors want to get paid in the US dollars. However, to be fully compliant, you should pay the contractors within their local currency. So obviously in Europe right now, that would be the Great British Pound and also the Euro. One way to do that, and we do have a host of partners that come to us to help them out throughout the world, they have capabilities of making payments from the United States directly to CXC Global or a company like CXC Global in one of these local European currencies. Most companies can go to their bank and they can open up an account in pounds. They can open up an account in euro, and they could have that money go directly to CXC Global. CXC Global would then, take those payments, make the applicable payment to the contractor, and then ensure compliance is done with tax reporting and all other requirements there. Those companies that want to stay within the US dollar, they want to be invoiced here in the US in US dollars, we can also do that. One of the things we created about 5 years ago is a currency management program, which allows CXC Global Europe, or any of the CXC Global offices around the world to pay their contractors in local currency, with CXC Global here in the United States taking on the management of the currency. We will convert the invoice that CXC around the world sends to us, convert it to U.S. dollars, so then we can then invoice our client and partners in U.S. dollars for an ease of accounting within your own within your own programs. The thing that you have to take a look at when there is currency conversion is that the conversion rates for smaller transactions, and while a contractor pay might not seem like a small transaction, it is a transaction that unfortunately companies that do currency conversions around the world and do like currency management like CXC, unfortunately we cannot purchase currencies at the rate you see on the on the internet today. Those are basically for banks and governments to basically trade currencies. How the rate that CXC is able to purchase currencies at is very similar to what you would see at a traveler exchange kiosk. What CXC Global does, which is very unique, is we take the average of the currency over the past 90 days, and then we then present that to our partners so that they know what that conversion is going to be, so they can build it into their budgets, they can build it into the forecasting, they can build it in if you're building an end client, you can build that into your end client rate. So we use what we call the bank buy rate, which is the rate that CXC can buy the currency at, and we use the average of the prior 90 days when we set our rates for our clients going forward. What this allows is compliance. This allows the contractors in Europe and around the world to get paid in their local currency, but your accounting departments and your tax departments here, everything is done in U.S. dollars for ease of all accounting policies. The last thing to remember is when you're doing international banking, any type of international banking, it normally takes about 24 to 48 hours for funds to be received around the world. So once CXC USA it institutes a wire to go to one of our offices around the world, it's generally about 48 hours. So as our clients and partners are paying us here domestically in the United States, contractors are normally paid, probably around 72 hours after that, depending on holidays, weekends, etc. It does take 2 days for wires to get there, which is pretty standard throughout the industry. Now, what I'd like to talk about is how CXC Global can, I'm sorry about that, how CXC Global can assist companies like yourself on the webinar today. CXC Global has a global footprint of over we have a footprint on over 5 continents, and we service 68 countries today. Our methodology is cost effective. We can help companies with providing short-term and long-term savings. We provide peace of mind, complete compliance wherever you choose to be. Our people are reliable, they're friendly, they're efficient, they're tenured, and they're experienced. If you look around most of the CXC teams around the world, the managing directors all have 15 plus years within the industry. Our senior teams have 10 plus years in the industry. Our total employee workforce for ourselves is about 150 CXC employees around the world, and we're paying in the area of around 8,000 contractors throughout the year. CXC has experience. We have a lot of knowledge, especially in the European marketplace. We have a lot of knowledge in the IT, engineering, pharmaceutical, aviation, oil and gas, finance, and other areas. We have a huge network of, as I said earlier, we have 68 different countries within our portfolio of services. Of those, 52 have a CXC entity, a CXC company, a CXC bank account. So CXC manages all of the process. It's a CXC person engaging your contractors, working with your contractors, paying your contractors, ensuring compliance. And in the other countries, we use a vetted partner. We have partners that we have used for years. The reason why CXC is not in all 68 countries is one, there's obviously some parts of the world there is just not enough volume that allows CXC to go and operate. And in other countries, it's just due to the rigors and constraints that a company faces that has foreign ownership when they're trying to set up a brand new business. The next thing I like to do is talk about the questions that have come in. We've had a couple questions come in, and the first one, as I mentioned earlier, it came in ironically right when Michelle was talking about how to hold files, how to build defense files. Very similar to here in the United States. Anybody knows that does 1099 or corp-to-corp compliance here in the United States, whoever the agent of record is that is doing that for clients needs to build a defense file. The defense file is something that is held should the IRS or a state revenue agency ever come and audit the client, the contractor, or the company doing the compliance for why the contractor was classified as an independent contractor. Very similarly in Europe. Europe does a compliance statement. John Clark, who's our senior compliance manager, works with our team in Europe who work with our contractors, and all contractors have to supply a list of documents, a list of personal information, and a list of government documents such as passports, driver's license, social ID cards, etc., proving a couple aspects. Proving number one, they have a right to work they have a right to work in that country. Two, their business is properly set up. Third, they are recognized as either a self-employed or a limited company contractor, and the structures are properly set up. We have to hold those on hand should HMRC, which is the Her Majesty's Revenue Commission in the United Kingdom, or any of the other local country jurisdictions, tax offices, come to our clients, our partners, our contractors, trying to understand why they have been classified that way. So very similar, CXC Global holds a defense file. The next question that came in is there a checklist for compliance? Absolutely. Just like the IRS 20-point test here in the United States, CXC Global holds and has copies of every country that we operate in. We carry all of the rules and we carry all the regulations that contractors have to abide by if they're going to be classified as an independent or self-employed or even an employed contractor. So it's very similar to the IRS. There is a very detailed checklist. CXC has these, and we put all of our contractors through it. The last question that came in, which was also very interesting, is who within an organization should drive compliance? And honestly, it's a very broad question, but for us, compliance begins at the beginning of a job creation. When a manager is going to a requisition tool or going to an HR person, asking about asking for a contractor, the right questions there need to be asked. What type of contractor you're looking for? Where do you want this contractor from? Do you want an expat? Do you want a local? Do you want a local national? Then when you're transitioning over to the actual recruitment of contractors and workers, there's some compliance that can be done there. You can ask some questions, or you can ask, have you ever worked as a contractor before? You can ask, whoever's doing the interviewing can ask some questions that can give you an idea which way this contractor is going to want to be classified. And then lastly, once the contractor or worker is identified, then a company like CXC Global, a trusted partner, comes in and manages all the compliance from the vetting process, through onboarding, through the defense file, through the end of the assignment, and then holding on to the defense file should our clients or our contractors ever get audited. So looking at where where CXC is going next. We appreciate everybody taking the time to basically join us today. We apologize for this slight technical difficulties we had very early on. I'd like to thank Michelle Riley and I'd like to thank John Clark for their time in putting this webinar together. Hope everybody found found interest. We are going to hold our next webinar, hopefully without technical challenges, in mid to late May, and we are going to be hopefully focusing on either the Asian market or the Latin American market. So again, two other regions, very complex, very challenging, where CXC has years of experience, and we hope to be able to bring a lot of content and a lot of information to you without technical difficulties. Last part, if you need any information, here are the contact informations. You know, anybody, we will provide a copy of these slides to everybody. We will provide a copy of the recording of the webinar, and we will also send out, there was 2 or 3 other questions that came in that I couldn't get to. We will send a copy of these to all the participants. But if you do need to contact anybody within CXC for European market, obviously Michelle Riley or John Clark, and please follow us. Get social with CXC. We have a very active Twitter campaign. We are on LinkedIn. We have all of our regions have their own Twitter handles and are out there publishing information regularly. So please, if you want to learn more about CXC, follow CXC, learn what's going on around, follow us on the vast social media channels, and we look forward to helping you out. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I know I went about 5 minutes over. I apologize. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties the technical difficulties early on. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to shoot myself, Michelle, or John an email, and we'd be happy to get back to you. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Have a great day.